Hi and welcome to another Carpenter Tutoring tutorial. I'm Amy and today we're going to talk about how to do subtraction with negative numbers, and we're going to talk about some of the patterns that are formed when we combine positive and negative numbers using subtraction. So let's get started by looking at what happens when we start with a positive number and subtract a negative number from it. No matter what values you have, if you start with a positive and subtract a negative number, your answer is always going to be positive. We can take a look at an example to prove this point. So let's say we had something like 5 minus negative 2. The way I like to think about this is when I see two minus signs next to each other with no number in between them, we do have a parenthesis between them, but there's no number there. I think about them working together to form the two strokes of a plus sign or an addition sign. So this subtraction symbol comes over with the other subtraction symbol to together form addition. So that means another way that we can look at this problem, 5 minus negative 2, is really just 5 plus 2, which would give us 7. Let's take a look at one more to make sure it still holds true. This time we'll look at 1 minus negative 8. I see those two subtraction symbols right next to each other again, no number in between them. So I know that the second symbol can come and work with the first to form addition. That makes the 8 positive now because we just used its negative sign to make the addition symbol. So we can really look at this problem as 1 plus 8, which would give us 9. Now let's take a look at what happens when we start with a negative number and subtract a positive number. In this situation, your answer will always be negative. So let's take a look at something like negative 5 minus 2. I'm starting at negative 5 and heading 2 more in the negative direction. That takes me to negative 6 and then negative 7. So my answer here is negative 7. Now something you might notice from the other example that we did is that when we had positive 5 plus positive 2, that equaled 7. Now when we have negative 5 minus 2, which is really another way of thinking about negative 5 plus negative 2, we ended up with negative 7. So what we can see is really we've changed both of these subtraction problems into addition problems. And like we talked about in an earlier video, when I'm adding together two like signs, either both positive or both negative, the answer comes out to be that same sign as well. So another way we can think about these negative minus positive subtraction problems is that we really take those two values, 5 and 2 in this case, add them together, 7, and then throw a negative sign in front of them, negative 7. Let's use that process to answer our next question. So let's look at something like negative 4 minus 7. Because I see a negative sign in front of both of these values, negative 4 and the subtraction in front of 7, I know that I can combine their values together, almost like addition. So 4 plus 7 would give me 11, and because I had both negative numbers, my answer should also be negative. So this would be negative 11. Here's where things get a little bit more complicated when we're subtracting two numbers with the same sign. The reason this gets a little bit complicated is because it matters where the larger value is. That's what decides our answer. Let's work first with a negative number minus a negative number. If the negative number that's further away from 0 comes first, and I'll use capital letters to denote this, and then the negative number closer to 0 comes second, our answer will stay negative, but it will be closer to 0. So for example, if I had negative 10 minus negative 4, again, I see my two minus signs next to each other, so I can think about this as addition, which means I can think of this as negative 10 plus 4, which would tell me to start at negative 10 and take 4 jumps towards 0. So that would take me to negative 9, negative 8, negative 7, and finally negative 6. The good news is that we can think about this a little more easily than having to think through those jumps on the number line. I really think the best way to work with these is to change them into addition problems. That means I'm really focusing on negative 10 plus 4. Like we talked about in our earlier video, when I have different signs in addition, I'm going to end up taking the difference between these two values. So the difference between 10 and 4 is 6. And then I use the sign for my answer of whatever value in the question was further away from 0. Negative 10 is further away from 0 than 4 is, so we're going to use negative 10's negative sign in our answer to make it negative 6. Let's use this for one more example. Say we had something like negative 12 minus negative 5. My first step is to change this into an addition problem. So I'd have negative 12 plus 5. Since I have an addition problem with different signs, I'm finding the difference between these two values. So the difference between 12 and 5 is 7. Because the negative 12 is further away from 0 than the positive 5, I know that I need to use the negative sign that is attached to the 12. That tells me my answer will be negative 7. Let's take a look now at what happens when we reverse the order of our negative values. Or in other words, when the negative value that is further away from 0 comes second. So if we start with a negative value closer to 0 and subtract a negative value further away from 0, we'll actually end up with a positive answer. Let's see how this plays out. We'll look at something like negative 7 minus negative 8. My first step is to change this into an addition problem. So I have negative 7 plus 8. Because I'm doing an addition problem with two different signs, I have to find the difference between these two values. So the difference between 7 and 8 is 1. And then I have to use the sign of whichever of my original values is further away from 0. Well, 8's further away from 0 than negative 7 is, so that means this will stay a positive 1. We're going to see a similar pattern emerge for a positive number minus a positive number. If the positive number further away from 0 comes first, then we'll still keep a positive answer. This would be something like 15 minus 7 equals 8. These are the kinds of subtraction problems that we're most comfortable with, so we don't have to think too hard about this. But things get a little bit trickier when our positive number further from 0 comes second. So if I start with the positive number closer to 0 and subtract the positive number further from 0, I'll actually end up with a negative answer. So we can reverse our problem above to test this. 7 minus 15. In this case, what I need to do, because I have different signs technically, right? I could think of this as an addition problem as 7 plus negative 15. So since I have different signs in that addition problem, I have to find the difference between these two values. The difference between 7 and 15 is 8. And then the number further from 0 is my negative 15. Its sign wins for our answer, so our answer becomes negative 8. Let's take a look at one more. Let's say we had something like 9 minus 13. Again, our first step can be to change this into addition, so we can really think of this as 9 plus negative 13. Now I see that I have different signs in this addition problem, so I need to find the difference between 9 and 13. The difference between 9 and 13 is 4. And then to decide my sign, I need to keep the sign of the value further away from 0. Negative 13 is further away from 0 than 9 is, so I'll use the negative sign from that negative 13. That means that 9 minus 13 is negative 4. Well, I hope it's been helpful to go through a couple examples of subtraction with or creating negative numbers together. As always, if you have any questions or would like to see any other topics discussed, please let me know in the comments. If you enjoy this content, please consider liking and subscribing as it does help us out quite a bit. Thanks so much for spending part of your day with me, and I'll catch you next time.